like a lot of y'all, I've had a lifelong interest in strange phenomena. From the earliest age, I started consuming every UFO, every paranormal, every Bigfoot, Loch Ness Monster book at my school library. I started consuming the books at the public library, and within a few years just started on this path towards exploring the unknown. I consider myself kind of an agnostic about this subject, but I think it's of the utmost importance, and I thank you all for being here at this historic first annual Texas UFO Conference, and it's an honor and a pleasure to be here. Thanks to Craig and all the wonderful speakers, so thank you for being here. I have a question. So how many of you, is this your first UFO conference? How many is it your second? How many of you have been to more than 5? All right, well, so right out of high school, I started working at the Austin Public Library downtown, and processing their periodicals, looking at the MUFON UFO Journal. That's where I discovered, lo and behold, there was an Austin MUFON UFO chapter, and I started attending those monthly meetings. It was a really wonderful time. I met a lot of great people. Eventually, I was asked to lead that group, and I led that group for about 10 years. This was also the period of time when the abduction phenomena was really exploding onto the scene. This was like the early 90s. Bud Hopkins' book and John Max eventually would come out, and all this media attention was happening, and one of the local experiencers started a UFO support group, and she led that for a few years, and then she asked me to lead it when she moved away. And even though I'm not an experiencer, I was honored to be offered that opportunity. But I told her, of course, I would only do this if the people in the group agreed to it, because I felt, out of the respect for them, I needed to have their blessing, and thankfully they gave it. I was also, at this time in the 1990s, starting to publish my own zine. There on the right, Elf Infested Spaces, Journal of Possible Paradigms, where I was exploring all these themes of UFOs, consciousness, conspiracies, mind control, and that sort of thing. And I also started through the local MUFON chapter, leading group events on a monthly basis, but also helping out with the audio video, like our friend Chris is doing and his brother are doing today for this event, handling the audio and the video for those kinds of events. And of course, this whole time, like so many of you, I'm accumulating more and more books on the subject faster than I can read them. And at some point, I started feeling like there's got to be something I should do with this library of books that I've collected. And then suddenly other people are giving me their collections of books, and fast on my way towards founding the nonprofit Anomaly Archives. This is just one of the things that we've archived is the websites of experiencers who are no longer with us. Jean Staffen was the woman who I was alluding to, who started the Austin UFO Experiencer Support Group. At the first meeting, there was probably 60 to 80 plus people. Her phone started ringing off the wall because the newspaper published her personal phone number. She was a fascinating person, had a lot of different experiences, and her website is still online. Sadly, she did just pass away earlier this year. But we'll do our best to preserve her legacy and her information on her experiences. So I also was involved in organizing other events. There on your left is the National UFO Conference. At that time in 2001, this was the longest running UFO conference in the United States. This was going to be the 38th annual NUFOC, National UFO Conference in Austin, Texas. Strangely, for decades, it had been hosted in a different city every year, but for 3 years in a row, it was going to be hosted in Texas. 1999, it was in San Antonio. In 2000, it was in Corpus Christi. And then in 2001, it was going to be in Austin, Texas. But if you look at the dates there, you might see that it was awfully close to a big world-changing event of September 11th, 2001. So unfortunately, we had to cancel that event. In the wake of that, we started publishing a local paranormal and parapolitical newspaper magazine called the Austin Para-Times, and went on, eventually when I left that, to found the Anomaly Archives, my publisher and friend went on to continue the magazine, but under the title Weird Magazine. As you probably know, Austin's pretty weird compared to the rest of Texas, and they've tried to embrace that with the mantra of keeping Austin weird. I'm not sure how weird it is anymore, but that was the name of the magazine, and that was the magazine issue where he interviewed me about the founding of the Anomaly Archives. So the Anomaly Archives is a 501c3 nonprofit that I founded in 2003. As I mentioned, I had been accumulating so many books, I just finally was like, they're not doing me as much good as they could do other people, so I just, with the help of other people in the local Anomaly community in Austin, Texas, went through all the process to become an official 501c3, and starting in 2003, we had a physical location where we could house the initial donation from me of over 1,000 books and magazines and other files on the subject of UFOs, parapsychology, consciousness, cryptozoology, everything anomalous that science tends to look away from. And we continued on. It was inspired by the world's biggest and most amazing UFO archive, which is not here in North America, sadly. It's in Sweden. It's a fantastic organization called the Archives for the Unexplained. AFU originally stood for Archives for UFO Research, but like the Anomaly Archives, they had to expand the breadth of their focus because, well, there's so many things that seem to have connections to the UFO phenomena. If you look at some of the stats there, this may actually be incomplete. They have 15 locations, over 7,000 square feet of shelving and materials, just a massive amount of data, and they just continue to acquire more and more and more. And the fellow you see there, he's looking at Project Blue Book microfilm. And they've just got an amazing array of stuff. And of course, not all of it's in English. They've got a lot of stuff in non-English languages. And they're scooping up stuff left and right. The fee there is named Klaus Zvan, and as I say, they were really the inspiration for me starting the Anomaly Archives. So here in North America, of course, just across the border on the other side of the state is in New Mexico, the Roswell, New Mexico International UFO Museum and Research Center. It's a really fine assembly of material. If you've ever visited there, I highly recommend you veer right as you come in the door. The strange thing to me is every time I've been there, there's nobody in the library. They're all going to the museum, because it is the museum after all, and there's all the nice, interesting displays, and then there's, of course, the gift shop that supports the efforts of this organization. But they really have a fine research facility there, and that's, like I say, just over the border. So, strangely, things are just changing really fast and furious, as I'm sure you've seen in the media since 2017. This slide I made for this presentation talks about another North American, New Mexican archive, that of David Marler. For those of you who aren't familiar with his work, he focused originally on sightings of triangular UFOs, but he has been amassing an amazing collection. Every time I see pictures of his, this is his home library where he's amassed all this material in Rio Rancho, New Mexico, on the outskirts of Albuquerque. It just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And a few years ago, he said that he's pledged to donate this material to the University of New Mexico for permanent archiving upon his demise or at some point in the future. And then last year, he actually became a member of a board of directors of CUFOS, the Center for UFO Studies. This is the organization that the famous Professor J. Allen Hynek, who created the Close Encounters of the First, Second, and Third Kind scale, who is the professor of astronomy who worked originally to debunk UFO sightings for the Air Force in Project Blue Book, but ultimately came around to realizing that there's really something important going on here, and debunking it is not what he was really wanting to do. And so he had formed CUFOS up in the northeast part of the country, and that's where it's been for many, many years. But recently, they've been sending their archives to David Marler in New Mexico, and you can see there's a picture of him sitting behind a stack of reel-to-reels and cassette tapes, which he's been digitizing and making available for the archive. And all those new filing cabinets contain all these other files from CUFOS that he's been getting. But lo and behold, news keeps just changing. Daniel brought to my attention yesterday a press release from David Marler and a brand new UFO organization called NUFO-HRC, that stands for National UFO Historical Records Center. And this press release says that they've started this nonprofit dedicated to the preservation and centralization of UFO/UAP information in the United States, which is great. You know, I am saying, you know, Sweden's got the best archive in the world. Well, this is fast becoming, if it isn't already really, the best UFO historical archive in North America. He's also become in possession of the files of one of the earliest UFO research organizations, NICAP, the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena. Those archives had been maintained by a fellow named Fran Ridge for a long time, but recently David Marler has acquired them, and again, has formed with CUFOS members and other archivists in the UFO field this new organization, obviously timed to coincide with the release of the latest part of the public UAP report, which we still haven't seen yet. We've been waiting since Halloween. But I want to quote something from his press release because I think it's relevant to all the subjects, and that is, he says, "What I find, though, is that despite the ever-increasing amount of people that are looking at the UFO or UAP subject, not a lot of people, a very small percentage, are interested in the history. Everyone wants to know what's new, and part of that is due, I think, to the framework by which the intelligence community and the media in recent years has framed the discussion, this new discussion." And he goes on later to mention, it's as if the UFO phenomena started in 2004 with the Nimitz case. Y'all may have seen all these, the Navy UFO videos or UAP videos. Basically, you know, there's been this rebranding of the UFO terminology as UAP, which I don't mind because it's got the word anomalous in it, right? Or no, it's aviation, unidentified aerial phenomena. I prefer unassimilated, fantastic observations, but anyway, this is huge news. I mean, I was already really jealous and impressed with his collection, but this is massive news, and I really am excited about it. And there really is a sea change happening out there. Whatever you think about the news that's come out since 2017 about the Pentagon's UFO research organization and the Lou Elizondo story, there's at the same time and for years preceding this been a sea change happening in academia, and most people aren't even really aware of it, but it's happening not in the physics departments, but it's happening in the humanities, the philosophy departments, and the religious studies department. And Daniel mentioned earlier that we both got to attend this fantastic event in March of this year at Rice University. This is really, to me, as big or bigger than the announcement I was just mentioning about David Marler's archive. This is a STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics university, Rice University in Houston, Texas. Their humanities department starting an archive focused on strange experience, strange encounters, UFO encounters, parapsychology, shamanic experiences, spiritualist medium experiences. Now, its size and scope doesn't quite perhaps rival that of David Marler's, or definitely not AFU's in Sweden, but this is a real big game changer. And the kinds of people that they have archived are my favorite UFO researcher, Jacques Vallée, has donated his materials. Dick Haynes, a very hardcore UFO researcher from back in the day, has donated his materials. Larry Bryant, another hardcore UFO researcher. But as I say, there's also there's a spiritualist medium from England who's still alive named, I think his name's Alexander. He's donated materials from his collection. Stanley Krippner, who's very famous in the shamanism and parapsychology field, has donated his material. And there's more and more of this. And it again, largely is happening because there are these professors at various universities around the country in the religious studies department who are taking a hard look at this phenomena and really mainstreaming it within academia, who previously have been not willing to look at this at all. Oh, also in the archive here is the material of Ed May, the head of the government's Stargate remote viewing program. And almost all of these people who are still alive spoke at this event, and I was honored to be on one of the many panel discussions, this one specifically talking about Anomalous Archives, about the importance and need of these kinds of archives. Now, everybody else on the panel, except for Klaas, I got to meet Klaas Svahn from Sweden, and he was so nice and generous and wonderful, and it was an honor to meet the guy who's behind one of these organizations that inspired me. But there's all the other people on the panel were mainly from other universities who have special collections, of course, very special, that are focused on these kinds of materials, whether it's spiritualist materials or UFO abduction experiences, or the contactees, or just classic UFO sighting material. I'm probably going on too long about this, but we were lucky enough to go behind the scenes and actually get to look in the archive. A lot of this material, so Whitley Strieber. Whitley Strieber's like thousands of the letters that he received after the publication of Communion, which affected so many people and brought forth so many memories of experiences. Those letters are now in the archive. And of course, these are professional archivists, so they're very keen on protecting people's identities and that sort of thing. So, but it was really great to get a little peek behind the veil there at this amazing archive. And this was also at the event. There's Jacques Vallée. So I meant to say this at the beginning. I'm going to touch on many historic UFO cases across Texas, and then talk more about my archive at the end if I have time. But I'm a huge Jacques Vallée fan, and I remember when I found out that when he moved from France in 1962 to the United States, where do you think he went? Austin, Texas, yeah. He's an astronomer, he's an information scientist, he's a venture capitalist now. So he was in Austin for about a year and was mapping Mars. I've read that he was one of the first people to observe the face on Mars. And in 1963, he moved to Chicago, Illinois to follow his mentor, Professor J. Allen Hynek, who was up at Northwestern University. And that's where J. Allen Hynek's papers are, though apparently this new nonprofit that I mentioned earlier that just announced themselves yesterday, they have said that they have some of his papers, so obviously they must have gotten split off, and there's papers over here, papers over there. And that's kind of the thing. It's like all these things are just scattered at all these different locations. There's very few centralized locations that are dedicated to this sort of thing. As I say, there's all these universities that have a piece of this person's history, a piece of this person's legacy, because they're universities, and either that was where that person was a professor, or that was their alma mater, what have you. But very few organizations exist where that's their reason for existence. And so it's nice to hear about the new one that David Marler's doing. Now, I just want to stress, it's very rare when people go off the deep end in such dramatic ways, but strangely enough, Marshall Applewhite was born in Spur, Texas, and was teaching at the University of St. Thomas in Houston, Texas, when he finally just quit and I think started his interesting journey into mass suicide. Jacques Vallée, again, was on the leading edge. In 1979, he wrote a book called Messengers of Deception, where he warned people about the dangers of belief and the dangers of people's beliefs being manipulated by other people. And he was right. I actually saw some of the members of this group come through Austin, Texas that last year before they committed suicide. And I remember seeing the flyer and I'm like, this sounds really familiar. They didn't use the same name that they had been using back in the 70s, Doe and D, or Toe and T. variations thereof. But a friend of mine who's an anthropologist, she and I went to the lecture, and it was interesting. It didn't seem that off the wall. They just basically were espousing that, this realm is not the most important realm, that the next realm is more important. Something that you might hear in any church or religious lecture. I don't know if they left with any people from Austin, but it was definitely an interesting experience and shocking to learn what happened later. And I just bring it up as a warning. The good news is most people don't go down that road. So Texas is obviously a huge state with a massive wealth of historic UFO cases. Up in North Texas, of course, we've had things like the Leveland case, the Lubbock Lights. Down south, we heard a little bit more about the Edinburgh case from 1966, which really I'd only learned about very recently. And the person behind the series of conferences down there, Noe Torres, has really made the south part of Texas a UFO mecca for the last 10 years, doing a whole slew of fantastic UFO events and getting the local cities on board with having the festivals because, hey, it's good promotion there, right? Meanwhile, in East Texas, we've got the classic ghost lights of Bragg Road, and of course the Bigfoot phenomena in East Texas in the Big Thicket. And then over in West Texas, a completely different geological environment, we also have mystery lights. In both cases, skeptics try to write off the lights as misidentification of car lights, and that certainly is just like every UFO sighting, 80 to 90%. Easily identifiable. It's those 5 to 10% that anomalies that you can't identify, that we don't have enough information to draw a judgment, that are the most intriguing. But balls of light, figure into this phenomena a lot. I mean, obviously, distant lights are a part of this mystery, and I'll say a little bit more in just a minute. But this fine gentleman, I want to recognize another legacy that needs to be honored. Charles Robert Riggs, Rob Riggs. He kind of was not your usual Bigfooter. He wasn't a blood and gutter. He was the kind of guy who wrote books like In the Big Thicket, On the Trail of the Wild Man, where he talked about the importance of looking at this from a multidisciplinary perspective and looking at not just Bigfoot sightings in the Big Thicket, but these balls of light and how all these different cultures have overlap in their descriptions of their traditions about big hairy men, wild men, and mystery lights. He also was a contributor to Weird Texas, and I was honored to speak at his memorial. So yeah, balls of light. There's an engraving from 1901 of an alleged multi-witness sighting of ball lightning, which still isn't even accepted as a real phenomena, even though it mostly is now, but it's still not understood. But balls of light have always been a part of human folklore. They're typically associated, obviously, with discarnate beings, the spirits of the dead, the shape-shifting of shamans and whatnot. And if you haven't read this book or anything by Joshua Cutchin, I highly recommend. This is Volume 1, Where the Footprints End, High Strangeness and the Bigfoot Phenomena. And I've been reading it voraciously, and just the other night in the section Witch Lights and Shape-Shifting, it mentions about Bigfoot. In 1998, a group of campers in Texas's Big Thicket watched an 8-foot-tall hairy hominid disappear, quote-unquote, in a flash of light into a golf ball-sized globe of light that hovered around the immediate area for 20 seconds before vaporizing with an electric snap. Witnesses in the area have observed identical behavior from large panthers. By the way, that was Josh and Tim Renner were quoting from an article by Nick Redfern, who will be speaking later. My point is, balls of light are a seminally important part of this phenomenon. There are so many cases of lights morphing into one thing and then into another. That seems to be significant. And of course, there's the Foo Fighters that were perceived as balls of light, though sometimes perceived as some kind of mechanical craft. And in fact, there are people who maintain that the Germans were developing these flying balls of light, or that these mechanical devices that were supposedly being designed to be able to stop the engines of the aircraft. Now, we don't have those reports in the Foo Fighter reports, but we do later here in Texas. Again, more balls of light. Project Beta, if you haven't read it, it's by my friend Greg Bishop. It's a classic book about the government's manipulation of the mind of a contractor who they worked with, who he started observing lights on Kirtland Air Force Base from his home that abutted it, and he was being a good American, and he reported it to the Air Force. And guess what they did? They messed with his mind. At least that's the interpretation of a lot of researchers. Whatever he was seeing, they basically pushed him eventually over the edge into madness. And there's been no prosecution for this. But one of the strange things is that some of those people, the AFASI, you may have heard of the name Richard Doty, he's still active again in ufology, but he was one of the ones pushing a lot of the lies and disinformation on poor old Paul Benowitz. But he and other people claim to have witnessed balls of light in Paul Benowitz's home. They would just hover up in the corners of the room, and multiple people would see this, and like if they tried to like get up on a ladder and touch it, they'd just wink out. Was that natural or man-made? Was that some kind of surveillance technology? Was that one of these plasma ball technologies that we're now learning about? As far back as the 90s, Area 51, they were supposedly triangulating lasers, creating balls of light that they could move around like a red light with a cat's toy, you know? And now we're seeing the patents about these Navy lasers that can do the same thing. Is that what we're seeing in some of these videos? Who knows? But then there are natural, what they call earth lights, balls of light that seem to be generated by tectonic stress that seem to recur at certain locations. Again, if that's the explanation for the West Texas Marfa lights or the East Texas Bragg Road lights, those are two totally different geologic environments. So what's going on there? And then just recently, September, up in north of Austin, were these multi-witness, multi-video of green balls of light where they moved around in a very interesting way. Most speculation is that there's some kind of drone swarm, like we keep hearing more and more about, also in connection to these naval operations. Don't know what to make of that case, but I think that video clip, that image is from Michael Daniels. But again, multiple witnesses, multiple video, but I'm not convinced. I think it may be a hoax, I'm not sure. Dan mentioned the book that I contributed an essay to back in 2017. This was before the big change at the end of 2017. And the title was TruFOs or UFOs, Planetary Poltergeists and Weapons of Mass Enchantment. And my basic premise is I was just throwing a whole bunch of information out there on all the different areas one could go down to interpret UFOs in other than an extraterrestrial fashion. I do think the extraterrestrial hypothesis is certainly possible. I just, as Jacques Vallée says, would be very disappointed if it turns out to just be that. I honestly think that there is a true alien other at the heart of the true UFO phenomena, but what it is, who it is, where it's from, when it's from, is up for debate. I think there's a lot of really interesting ideas about what it could be, and that the mechanism of manifestation is probably going to be found within the realms of parapsychological research and not necessarily just looking for nuts and bolts craft that you can kick the tires of. But it's important to warn people about the UFOs, the false UFOs. Again, like Vallée and others have been warning, there's so many examples of how human organizations or individuals, religious, governmental, corporate, try to manipulate us through our belief in these phenomena. And so I think it's always a good, it's that old grain of salt, you know, just, or as Stanton Friedman used to say, you know, keep an open mind, but not so open that your brains fall out. And we are in this amazing time. As I say, you know, at the end of 2017 was when a whole bunch of things started coming out. And just a few weeks ago, Brigadier General Pat Ryder holds this live press conference, and at some point, a reporter, without laughing, brings up the UAP report that we've been expecting. It was released, the secret version was released to the committee members, I believe on Halloween, perfect timing. By the way, that's when they originally did War of the Worlds, right? The original hoax. But we've been waiting weeks and weeks now for the release of the public version, which should be interesting because a lot of stuff's going on. This UAP task force, UAPTF, they're going to get rebranded as the AARO, AARO. In the last few weeks, there's been some news articles talking about the fact that in February of this year, the UAP task force met with Canadian military officials to talk about the report that was about to come out. And then just recently, a whole other investigation is underway, or at least the beginnings of it. The NASA, finally, you might think NASA would be the organization to look into this stuff, but they're finally getting on board with looking into this, whereas they've pretty much poo-pooed it like so many other governmental organizations for so long. And so right now they're just kind of trying to figure out, well, how are we going to go about investigating this? Well, duh, there's been, a million organizations looking into this for a long time. So they've apparently decided to meet with GEIPAN, G-E-I-P-A-N. That's the French UFO investigating organization that's been around since 1977. So not all governments are just like, oh, there's nothing to this.
And their report, by the way, that they published, 10 years ago or something?
Yeah.
Definitely worth a read.
Yeah.
Get the English translation, but if you are a serious scholar of this subject, it is absolutely worth a read.
It's there's a lot of knowledge to be gleaned from these other foreign, non-American organizations. So the UAPTF is being renamed the AARO, A-A-R-O, for All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office. There's the anomaly. Oh, good. All right. So what is this 2017 sea change that started? Well, of course, at the end in October, Tom DeLonge, Blink-182 musician, singer, had been talking for a long time about him being in contact with government and military officials, and people were pretty skeptical of this until the WikiLeaks happened. And interestingly enough, one of John Podesta's emails with DeLonge and I believe an Air Force person came out, and it maybe gives us a hint of what his ultimate aim is besides monetizing UAP and UFO information and technology. And that was when he said, quote, "This project is about changing the cynical views of youth towards government." And in some cases, seemingly absolving all the people who've been doing the secret stuff, probably in violation of the Constitution, but of course, in the interest of national security for the last 70 years. Anyway, he rolled out all the different people involved. These are some huge bigwigs. Chris Mellon, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Defense for Intelligence. Jim Simivan, former Senior Intelligence Services, CIA's Director of Operations. Steve Justice, former Advanced Systems Director for Lockheed's Skunk Works. And of course, Lou Elizondo, the poster child for I Can't Tell You because I signed an NDA and it's all top secret. And then of Hal Puthoff. So there was another $20 million program besides the ATIP OSAP program that he was involved with. That was the remote viewing one that was secret for a long time. But this is just a quick look of okay, I mentioned NICAP earlier in 1956. They were one of the earliest UFO organizations. Now their archives are with the organization that's not on here because they just announced themselves today, or yesterday rather. But you can see since 2017, there's been a plethora of organizations that are popping up to take advantage of and position themselves to be like the new MUFON or ED, and we'll see where all that goes. And then there's good old Hal. Yes, Hal, quite familiar with his background. I was fascinated with psychic remote viewing long before the secret program was revealed because he had published about it, and you could learn how to make money doing it. In case you know, psychic remote viewing, precognitive associative remote viewing, it's great to win the lottery or blackjack or other things. Just read into the books about it. But there's a lot going on in Austin with consciousness research associated with Hal Puthoff. On the left is one of the awards that the other nonprofit that I used to serve on the board of got for their research project where we did a remote dowsing research project. So in 2012, I think we got this War Collier Prize from the International Remote Viewing Association. And Hal is one of the original advisors on INAX is the organization. And then the Anomaly Archives has hosted good old Paul Smith, a remote viewer, former military remote viewer, where he gave a lecture. And you can, on our YouTube channel, you can see this lecture for free, Remote Viewing UFOs.
I have a quick question. Does Dr. Puthoff does he lecture in Austin very often, or?
No, he's pretty reclusive. He's actually, he was going to speak at a big space conference that had nothing to do directly with UFOs or psychic this. It was just a straight space industry conference, and I was really excited about that, but I think they canceled it, or he canceled it at the last minute. He's fairly reclusive, yeah. So I was going to talk about San Antonio a little bit here. That's my birth town, even though I grew up and lived most of my life in Austin. A lot of people don't know about its anomalous history, besides the fact that some of the paperclip Nazis went there, besides the fact that some of the MK Ultra programs dealing with children were done there. This guy up on the top right there, Tom Slick, was an oil man and investor who, over the course of the 40s and 50s, founded 3 really significant organizations. Texas Biomedical Research Institute, which has a primate research lab, which often gets associated with stories of escaped chimps or possibly sequestered Bigfoot. I kid you not. Southwest Research Institute, which that photo there, Building 70 at their chemical engineering building. Let me see if I can find this quote. So they've definitely accepted this Bigfoot history. Oh, yes. So on their Facebook page in December of 2021, they said, "The metal cutout of our favorite mythical creature moves every few weeks, popping up in various locations across the 1,500-acre campus." Southwest Research Institute founder Tom Slick famously sought the Yeti and other creatures in his bid to understand the mysteries of the universe. So they've embraced that. That's not kind of nice. Mind Science Foundation was his attempt to create a parapsychology investigation organization. Sadly, they seem to have really shifted to just mainstream neuroscience. The closest they get to anything weird is trying to find out why people believe in anything. Of course, San Antonio is also very well known for UFO experiencer and abductee Whitley Strieber, former horror writer, science fiction writer turned UFO proselytizer, a very controversial. He's still very active, and like I mentioned, he's donated his collection to Rice University. So San Antonio has a rich history of UFO conferences as well. This one in, 1980, I think? Oh, no, excuse me, 84, featuring John Allen Hynek, Joseph Allen Hynek. And these are the proceedings and some of the post-material that we have in the Anomaly Archives. Of course, back, I mentioned earlier, the National UFO Conference that was in 1999 was in San Antonio. There's, again, the poster art for that. That also featured Whitley Strieber and the other UFO billionaire, Joe Firmage. And we've archived some of the local news coverage of that as well. You can see that on on our YouTube channel. And of course, MUFON investigated the 2008 Stephenville UFO flap. This really brought so much national, international attention down on Stephenville when there was a series of sightings and lots of witnesses. On the left there is Robert Powell, who was for a time MUFON's lead investigator. He ultimately left MUFON and helped found this other UFO organization that has since rebranded itself as a UAP organization, the SCU Society for, or no, I'm forgetting what it stands for, but the Coalition for UAP Studies. This is a very significant case. I also mentioned Mike DeGroff was he took over from me at some point, he was at some point was the head of Austin MUFON. He also was a board member for a time on the Anomaly Archives, and he helped with some of the interviews there. I'm not sure which investigation. Very significant, besides this, the wealth of witness testimony, this actual radar data that showed a object moving that was tracked for, I believe, over an hour or about an hour. I think it was moving at like 40 miles an hour, so not like zipping around doing anything truly anomalous, but it certainly wasn't supposed to be where it was, because guess where it was headed? Straight to the president's ranch at Crawford. This is a really well-documented modern flap of UFO activity here in the state. And another person whose legacy is worth noting and preserving is Angela Joyner, who passed away at the beginning of January 2021. Yeah. She won awards for her journalism, and in an interview with a friend of mine, she commented that during one of those TV appearances, a Channel 11 News reporter asked her behind the scenes, "How did you have the guts to write this story? I wouldn't have touched a UFO story with a 10-foot pole." The article says, "This is an anecdote which was shared during the Biennale of America interview with Angela Joyner in February of 2010, perfectly illustrates the stigma still present in the UFO topic not too long ago." And that does seem to be changing. I mean, there does seem to be a lot less opportunity, or the media seems a little less prone to cueing the X-Files music or Twilight Zone music ever since the revelations of the Pentagon UFO program. But as we saw in an earlier presentation, they're still prone to ridicule. So some other examples, Roy Craig, who was the chief investigator for the Condon Committee that was done in the late 60s at the same time as Blue Book was winding down, was paid for by the Air Force to be an independent investigation. Most people consider it really a sham, that it had already arrived at its conclusion that UFOs were not important. And sure enough, by the end of it, they were saying there's nothing to be gained scientifically by investigating UFOs. Well, Roy Craig was its chief investigator, but he kind of changed his mind, at least to the point where he thought that there was something more to it. He wasn't necessarily a believer, but this book was published in 1995 by the University of North Texas Press. And though he was from I believe a Colorado university, Texas A&M got his collection. The papers of Roy Craig are housed at Texas A&M University's Cushing Library, and he donated 9 boxes of his papers and research findings to the Science Fiction and Fantasy Research Collection at Texas A&M University's Cushing Memorial Library. And he chose them over his Fort Lewis College because the librarian there, here in UNT, or rather Texas A&M, asked for them. And because they promised that they would be in a climate-controlled environment and made available to the public and properly processed. So whatever part he may have played in debunking UFOs in the Condon Committee, he thought that this was important enough. Now, this was on display in 2003, and it's from the collection, and yes, this is a silly thing. It's a lawn mowing muffler that apparently was glowing red hot and flew through the air and was mistaken for a UFO. I kind of doubt that. I really kind of doubt that, but you're going to be hearing more from Cash Landrum case. This is such a phenomenal case. I mean, I still remember seeing "That's incredible" and them talking about the witnesses. This had a big impact on my young, impressionable mind. I still think it's a fascinating case. There's a great bunch of information about it, digging through all the evidence at blueblurrylines.com. But what's really interesting, and again, going to the archival aspect, is you can find some of the archival documentation about this in the Texas Department of Health files, and they've got a PDF from there, because of course they tried to sue the government because of their belief that they had been irradiated by what the energies coming off the object. But you'll hear a lot more about that from
John Schuessler.
Yep.
Wrote a fantastic book about the Cash Landrum incident. If you haven't, that really is really, I mean, it's worth a read.
Yep, former MUFON director John Schuessler. Of course, the Lubbock lights in 1951. Birds, right? Birds seen at night, reflecting light. Now, when I was going through Lubbock not too long ago, I saw during the daylight some birds flying up, and I was like, well, they're reflecting light, but I just don't buy this explanation. But one of the primary witnesses, who was a professor, his files are on file at the Texas Tech University Special Collections. So another example of how all these kind of pieces of the puzzle, pieces of history are archived, but they're not in a central location. The Leveland cases, interestingly enough, Blue Book did classify as an unknown the 1952 Leveland case, which was like a couple of witnesses seeing a spinning top type object. But then a few years later, there was this mass sighting in 1957 by multiple witnesses, multiple incidents over the course of the evening. Yes, there was thunderstorms in the area, and so what do you think they wrote it off as? Other ball lightning. Kevin Randall, an old hat in the UFO field, has published a new book called Leveland, where he reinvestigates the case, looks at all the old material, and this is an important case, as he points out, because it involves the car stoppage phenomena. You don't really hear about this anymore, but that used to be a staple in these close encounters where, as the object approached, I think even George Jones, maybe he mentioned his car kind of starting to weirdly react when he saw his object. And it's a fascinating case. There's so many incidents in this particular case, but again, it's just ball lightning. But Kevin Randall argues that there's actually even more cases if you go further west, as far as White Sands. I mean, that's like 100, 150 miles away, I think, or further. But there were similar sightings around that same period of time by military witnesses. So he's trying to, dig back into this old case and see if there's something more interesting there. This great case from Brazoria County, somewhere between Damon and West Columbia, I think. The Deputy Bob Good and Chief's Deputy Billy Edwin McCoy were traveling. They were together because I believe Good had gotten an alligator bite on his hand. A baby alligator had bitten him on his hand, and he needed help on his patrol that night, just in case he couldn't drive anymore because of the wounded hand. And they saw in the distance some lights, and at some point the lights surged toward them and became this huge object, which you can see the kind of the shape they drew right there. And all this material is archived at the Brazoria County Historical Museum. And they're very generous. If you email them, they'll send you everything they have digitally. They've got a 2-hour audio oral history that Good did 20 years after the fact. But it's a fascinating case because they had the sighting twice. So they got freaked out by this massive object that was even having a shadow cast on the grass underneath the object. This is also one of the first times I think I've ever heard them, a witness, use that phrase that you've probably heard before. It was a football field wide, and they hightailed it out of there at 110 miles an hour, and they went back because it receded, and they went back. Same thing happened again, and then they left for good. Later that evening, the other deputy commented that, oh, you don't seem to be favoring your hand like you were earlier in the evening, and he takes off the bandage and the wound is healed. And anyway, it's one of those cases. This is another one. Blue Book is like, yep, it's unknown. They actually are like, we don't know. They don't know. And there's also the implication, and it's this kind of hard to track down, but there appears to be a report of possible men in black. So. Gosh, how much time do we have? Well, I'll try to go through this real quick. A very controversial figure in Texas UFO history is Ray Stanford. This is pictures of him pretty young, I guess around the 1980s. He did speak at a MUFON conference on UFO technology back in June of 1980 at the Clear Lake City, Texas Symposium. when he was very young in 1954, he had a multi-witness sighting, including local law enforcement who saw these objects on the coast, either Corpus Christi or Padre, depending upon which account you read. He wrote this up and I believe sent in the affidavits from the law enforcement officers to Fate magazine, and he got the cover story 2 years later. He would go on to create 2 organizations in Austin, Texas, Project Starlight International and his Association for the Understanding of Man. Now, science, not science. Where does the line blur here? It blurs with Ray Stanford. He had this piece of property that was, I believe, donated to him west of Austin near the lake. You can see the picture there with all the equipment. They had radar, lasers, magnetometers, and supposedly an elaborate phone tree system that when the radar was triggered by something that couldn't be corroborated as an aircraft, it would trigger a phone tree and contact members of their organization that were nearby to wherever the object had been detected so that they could go out and observe it. And this is in the 70s. Now, he also at the time had his Association for the Understanding of Man, where he was practicing channeling and doing automatic writing and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of people who don't really know what to make of good old Mr. Stanford. And he has gone on since to make all kinds of claims about all the video, or all the film footage and photographs he took of UFOs. He has always claimed to be psychic and seemed to be always at the right place at the right time to get these photographs. But he, in thinking in terms of archives, he has not made those photos public. And in fact, that's made a lot of people very angry, and who they start trying to smear his name. So, but the fact remains that at least one of his sightings was reported to the Air Force and is considered an unknown, and that sighting was of a blue-white cigar-shaped UFO that hovered above Mansfield Dam outside Austin on the anniversary of the birth of the modern UFO era, June 24th, 1967. We do at least have, he's still living and still does interviews, and we'll talk all about all these experiences. It's fascinating stuff, but still very controversial. So several years ago, Christian Lambright, there on the left, published X Descending, which is about 2 different UFO stories. One involving Paul Benowitz that I mentioned earlier, and videos or film videos, photographs that he did, and the work of Ray Stanford. In 1985, in Corpus Christi, Stanford had a multi-witness sighting where he filmed with an 8mm color camera a series of 7 or 8 discs on their edge, vertically, moving the way you wouldn't expect a flying saucer to move, this way. And he said in analyzing the photos, and he'd show the film to people like Chris Lambright and other researchers, but only privately. He thought he could see lines of energy and force around this object that were like beaming out ahead of the direction it was moving. As I say, he's a very controversial figure, and last year, the fellow at the bottom right from the University of Albany, Kevin Knuth, who is a member of one of these new UAP organizations and an academic scientist with NASA-type credentials, he gave a presentation for the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics, who have recently formed, with the help of one of these Navy UAP witness pilots, or just witnesses, an advocacy group for unidentified aerial phenomena within this long-established American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics. So they held this whole little mini-conference about safety issues associated with aerospace and UFOs, UAP, and Knuth was giving a presentation where he featured prominently the slide you see there showing the imagery of Ray Stanford. Now, a lot of people were like up in arms saying, this guy is a crank, he's a contactee, he channeled stuff, you can't take anything he says seriously. Nobody's been able to vet these photographs. But this guy, did what I thought was a pretty good presentation. But what's also interesting is it brought up this issue of this guy on the left, Mirabeau, I may be mispronouncing his name, but as this UFO researcher of some repute, Keith Basterfield says, another earlier Mirabeau UFO-related account was given by Lambright later in his book. In early 1978, Mirabeau wrote to a Dr. John Warren expressing interest in Warren's 1977 MUFON symposium, yada, yada, yada. Well, I think I've left out. Basically, Mirabeau met with Ray Stanford and allegedly saw this film that shows this beam going out in front. And what is this guy getting lots of money to research? Using lasers to beam out in front of a craft to make it faster and better. And it's clear that he's been, like so many people, looking at UFOs and reverse engineering, if you will, technologies and ideas that can help us aeronautically. Clearly flying in the face of the Condon committees saying that there's no scientific value in investigating this. And there's, just to drive this point home, a former NASA aeronautics guy of much repute, Paul Richard Hill, this book I believe was published posthumously, but it's called Unconventional Flying Objects, and it's all about looking at UFO cases and trying to come up with new ideas about aerospace and aerodynamics and so forth. Well, I'm out of time, but just real quickly, so whatever you think of Ray Stanford, if you just Google Ray Stanford fossil hunter, you'll find he's pretty well accepted by NASA as the real deal in terms of finding more fossils than anybody else, just like he used to get more UFO photographs than anybody else. That is a placard of display at NASA's Goddard facility about the stuff that he found. They were going to dig a big area and build an expansion. Well, he found dinosaur stuff there, and now they're not going to build it there because, well, it's history. So I don't get to tell you much more about my Anomaly Archives, but you can go to anomalyarchives.org. We've been around since 2003. We have over 7,000 books, thousands of periodicals, hundreds, thousands of files. We are currently homeless due to the effects of the pandemic. We lost our lease. We have been in storage, sadly, since February 2021. If anybody knows anything about Austin, you know that there's nothing affordable about it. So we are still struggling to move forward, but I was going to just tell you all about our activities and some of our collections. But you can just go to the website. We've got our YouTube channel. You can see lots of past videos. Back in 2020, we did a 6-week fundraising streamathon on YouTube where we had probably over 50 or 60 hours of lectures for free to raise money. We raised about half of our annual budget that year, but sadly, it wasn't enough to keep us from becoming homeless. So. And there we are when we were packing up all those books to be put into storage. So the story isn't over yet. You can find us at our website. We have most of everything that's cataloged is on our online catalog. We still are doing outreach events, virtual and physical, and you can reach me at anomalyarchives.org. Thank you so much.